this app and I'll share profits.
CEO Harper Winters declared with desperate sarcasm as she gestured toward her laptop screen, displaying lines of broken code, addressing the statement to Malik Johnson, who was emptying her office trash during his routine night custodial duties. Her frustration about the technical crisis that threatened to destroy her company, making her mock the very idea that a janitor could solve problems that had stumped her entire engineering team. At 33, Malik had perfected the professional invisibility that characterized maintenance workers in tech environments. Moving through TechFlow Solutions open plan offices while overhearing sprint planning meetings, code reviews, and architectural decisions that developers and executives discussed freely around someone they considered irrelevant to their technical innovations and business strategies. But the React Native application failing on Harper's screen contained state management errors and API integration bugs that Malik recognized as fundamental issues he could resolve in less than 2 hours, using optimization techniques that most junior developers hadn't learned, despite years of formal computer science education. Ms. Winters, are you serious about that profit-sharing offer? Malik asked quietly, his voice carrying the careful respect that custodial workers used when acknowledging executive communications that weren't explicitly directed toward them. Harper looked up from her frustrated debugging attempts with surprise that quickly shifted to curious attention rather than the dismissive irritation that characterized most tech executives when service workers interrupted critical development crises. At 29, Harper possessed the kind of striking blonde beauty and sharp entrepreneurial intelligence that had enabled her to build TechFlow Solutions from a dorm room project into a major venture capital-backed startup, though her success in business development hadn't provided her with the deep technical expertise needed to evaluate code quality or engineering competence. "I'm absolutely serious," Harper replied, her tone mixing desperation with the kind of performative confidence that startup founders used when making statements they hoped would motivate solutions to seemingly impossible technical problems. "We have a product launch in 48 hours, and if this app doesn't work perfectly, we lose our Series B funding and the company goes under." "What specific technical problems are preventing the launch?" Malik asked, his question revealing familiarity with software development terminology that didn't match Harper's assumptions about custodial workers' technical knowledge or professional background. "Memory leaks that crash the app after 5 minutes of use, API calls that timeout randomly, and a user interface that becomes completely unresponsive during peak usage," Harper replied, her voice carrying frustration about technical challenges that seemed insurmountable to her non-technical perspective. Malik studied the codebase architecture displayed across Harper's multiple monitors with the analytical attention that had once made him exceptional at full-stack development before ethical whistleblowing had destroyed his tech career and forced him into employment that concealed rather than utilized his programming expertise. The technical issues were symptoms of poor state management, inefficient database queries, and lack of proper error handling, problems that could be systematically resolved through code refactoring and optimization patterns that required experienced developer knowledge rather than additional engineering resources. "Ms. Winters, I have experience with React Native development, and the issues you're describing are solvable through architectural improvements that could be implemented within your current timeline," Malik said, his admission both professionally presumptuous and personally dangerous, since revealing his technical background could expose him to questions about his current employment situation. "You have React Native experience," Harper repeated, setting down her energy drink completely as she processed information that could either solve their immediate crisis or represent elaborate deception by someone seeking attention during emergency circumstances. I have 7 years of full-stack development experience, including mobile applications, API architecture, and performance optimization, Malik replied, using deliberately measured language to acknowledge his qualifications without providing details about career destruction and systematic exclusion from the tech industry. Harper felt a mixture of desperate hope and skeptical caution about whether trusting critical product development to a custodial worker represented sound crisis management or complete breakdown of professional judgment under pressure. "Mr. Harper began, realizing she didn't know the name of the person who might be able to save her company when her credentialed engineers had failed to deliver functional software. "Johnson, Malik Johnson." "Mr. Johnson, if you have full-stack development experience, why are you working in custodial services instead of software engineering?" Harper asked, with the direct questioning style that characterized startup founders accustomed to evaluating technical talent and professional backgrounds. The question was both inevitable and painful, requiring Malik to address the systematic retaliation that had made his transition from senior developer to invisible maintenance worker necessary, despite his exceptional technical competence and proven ability to build scalable applications. "Ms. Winters, I wasn't able to obtain software engineering employment, despite my technical qualifications, due to circumstances that had nothing to do with my coding abilities or project delivery record," Malik replied carefully, using diplomatic language to indicate professional retaliation without making accusations that could be dismissed as unfounded complaints. "What kind of circumstances prevent qualified developers from obtaining engineering positions in a market with massive talent shortage?" "Whistleblowing about unethical practices that resulted in termination and industry blacklisting, despite the issues I reported being ultimately validated through federal investigation and prosecution." Harper processed this information with growing recognition that her assumptions about talent recognition and hiring practices in tech might be contradicted by systematic retaliation that excluded qualified professionals based on ethical behavior rather than technical inadequacy. "Mr. Johnson, are you legally able to work on our code base, and what would you need to resolve the technical issues preventing our product launch?" Harper asked, her executive training demanding practical assessment of both capability and liability during crisis circumstances. "I can work on your code base under consulting arrangement, and I would need access to your development environment, database architecture documentation, and approximately 8 hours to implement the performance optimizations and bug fixes required for stable production deployment," Malik replied. 8-year-old Zoe would be waking in 6 hours, expecting help with her advanced mathematics homework and breakfast conversation about ethical decision-making, unaware that her father was preparing to return to the programming environment that had once defined his professional identity, but had become associated with career destruction and financial instability. "Ms. Winters, I need you to understand that working on your application will require me to use skills I've been avoiding for 3 years, and that returning to software development could create complications for both of us if my previous industry conflicts affect your business relationships," Malik said, establishing realistic expectations about potential consequences while committing to attempt the technical rescue. "What kind of complications are you concerned about?" Harper asked, recognizing that emergency software development success would require comprehensive understanding of all potential risks and dependencies. "If word spreads that TechFlow hired a blacklisted developer to save your product launch, you could face criticism from investors or partners who prioritize industry relationships over technical competence, and I could face additional retaliation from people who prefer that my expertise remain invisible." Laid, as they negotiated terms for emergency software development that would either demonstrate Malik's exceptional qualifications or expose both of them to significant professional and business risks, Harper began to understand that the tech industry's talent shortage might be artificially created through systematic exclusion of capable developers rather than actual scarcity of programming expertise. Mr. Johnson, what do you need from me to successfully complete this development work? Harper asked, understanding that software crisis resolution would require rapid coordination and comprehensive support rather than just individual technical heroism. Development environment access, database migration tools, and acknowledgement that I'm providing emergency consulting rather than seeking permanent employment that could create ongoing complications for your hiring practices and investor relations. As they prepared for all-night coding session that would either save TechFlow Solutions from bankruptcy or reveal the limitations of emergency technical intervention, both understood that their collaboration was challenging fundamental assumptions about talent recognition, professional competence, and the ways that ethical behavior could be weaponized against technically qualified individuals. Some technical crises require recognizing that the most capable solutions often come from unexpected sources, and that emergency circumstances can reveal expertise that normal hiring processes systematically exclude through bias rather than merit-based evaluation. The investigation that would reshape Harper's understanding of tech industry talent practices began at 6:15 a.m. the following morning, when she arrived at TechFlow Solutions carrying comprehensive research about Malik Johnson's development background and a fully functional application that had been transformed from crashing disaster to production-ready software in a single night. Mr. Johnson, Harper said, finding Malik in the development lab where he was completing code documentation while processing the psychological aftermath of successfully returning to complex software engineering after 3 years of suppressing his technical expertise. I spent the early morning hours testing the application you rebuilt, and it's performing better than our original specifications projected. Malik felt the familiar anxiety spike that accompanied any inquiry into his professional background, uncertain whether Harper's investigation indicated respect for his demonstrated competence or concern about employing someone whose programming career had ended in industry controversy that could create complications for her startup. Ms. Winters, I understand that my situation raises questions about why experienced developers end up in non-technical employment despite the industry's claims of talent shortage, Malik replied, using careful language for addressing potential concerns about his professional reliability while maintaining emotional boundaries that protected him from painful memories of systematic exclusion. Mr. Johnson, you weren't just a full-stack developer, Harper said, her voice carrying focused attention that characterized entrepreneurs processing information that fundamentally altered their understanding of talent acquisition and industry practices. You were lead developer at Data Vault Technologies, with architectural responsibility for applications serving millions of users before you reported illegal data harvesting that resulted in $50 million in federal fines. Wired, the recognition was both validating and concerning, confirming that Harper now understood his technical achievements while potentially exposing him to expectations and scrutiny that could recreate the professional pressure that had contributed to his career destruction. Yes, ma'am, that's accurate. But I also need you to understand that whistleblowing about privacy violations made me unemployable in the tech industry, which is why I've been working in custodial services despite maintaining current knowledge of development frameworks and emerging technologies, Malik explained, his honesty about career consequences both personally vulnerable and professionally necessary. What specific retaliation did you experience after reporting the data harvesting? Harper asked, her tone carrying entrepreneurial directness that indicated she was seeking information for strategic evaluation rather than personal judgment about controversial professional history. The question required Malik to revisit the most devastating period of his professional life, when ethical decision-making had resulted in systematic ostracism that had forced him to choose between fighting for tech industry vindication and providing stable support for his daughter during her elementary school years. I was terminated from Data Vault within 72 hours of filing privacy violation reports with federal authorities, Malik said, his voice carrying controlled emotion about circumstances that had made defending his professional reputation feel impossible, despite the ultimate validation of his ethical concerns. My former colleagues and supervisors shared information about my problematic attitude and poor cultural fit with other tech companies, making it impossible to obtain references or recommendations for comparable development positions. Harper processed this information with growing recognition that her assumptions about meritocratic hiring in tech might be contradicted by systematic patterns that excluded qualified professionals based on characteristics unrelated to coding ability or project delivery success. Mr. Johnson, what happened to your family during your transition out of software engineering? Harper asked, understanding that career retaliation affected entire households rather than just individual professionals seeking employment in their chosen fields. My wife left 18 months after I was blacklisted from tech work, Malik replied, his voice carrying the controlled grief that came from understanding how financial uncertainty and social stigma could destroy relationships and family stability. She couldn't handle the economic instability and professional isolation that resulted from my decision to prioritize user privacy over company profits. Ooh, what about your daughter? Zoe stayed with me, which meant I needed employment that provided health insurance and allowed me to be available for single parenting while avoiding the professional networks that would have exposed my industry blacklisting and created additional employment complications. Meanwhile, 8-year-old Zoe was experiencing her own curiosity about her father's sudden return to programming activities and the change in his mood following his successful application development the previous evening. "Dad, you look the way you did when you used to work on computers before we moved to this apartment," Zoe observed during their morning breakfast routine, her emotional intelligence recognizing that her father was processing professional satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. At 8, Zoe possessed mathematical abilities and logical thinking skills that had already exceeded grade-level expectations, though she'd learned not to discuss her father's programming background with teachers or classmates who didn't understand why someone so technically qualified would work in custodial services. "Zoe, I helped Ms. Winters fix some computer problems that reminded me of programming work I used to do before you started school," Malik replied, using honest communication while protecting his daughter from details about systematic retaliation and professional persecution. "Are you thinking about working with computers again, instead of cleaning buildings?" Zoe asked, her question revealing both hope that her father might return to work that utilized his education and concern that career changes could disrupt the financial stability they'd built together. "I don't know, sweetheart. Programming work requires dealing with people and companies that can be unpredictable in ways that cleaning work isn't, but it also uses skills that I'm good at, and that might help our family have better financial security." The conversation was both practical family planning and psychological processing, requiring Malik to balance professional opportunities against parental responsibilities while managing anxiety about returning to industry environments that had previously resulted in systematic retaliation and economic vulnerability. Later that morning, Harper called a meeting with her senior technical staff to address development performance issues and hiring practices that had been exposed by the previous night's crisis and Malik's exceptional problem-solving capabilities. "I want to discuss why our engineering team was unable to resolve application issues that a maintenance worker solved in a single night," Harper announced to CTO Ryan Mitchell and Head of Engineering Sofia Rodriguez. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing that questioning engineering team performance could expose professional limitations and technical decision-making that he preferred to keep private from startup leadership and investor oversight. Harper, emergency bug fixes are different from sustainable software architecture, Ryan replied, his tone carrying defensive authority about development practices. Quick solutions often create technical debt that becomes expensive to maintain long-term. Ryan, the code quality analysis I conducted this morning shows that the emergency fixes actually improved our overall architecture and reduced technical debt rather than creating additional maintenance burden, Harper replied, her voice indicating that she was evaluating explanations rather than accepting them without technical scrutiny. The discussion continued for 90 minutes, with Harper gradually discovering that TechFlow's hiring practices included subjective evaluation criteria and cultural fit requirements that could systematically exclude qualified candidates while maintaining the appearance of merit-based technical selection. "Harper, I want to be clear about something," Ryan said as their meeting concluded, his voice carrying warning about potential complications. Hiring developers with controversial backgrounds could create investor relations problems and team cohesion issues that affect our ability to scale successfully. Ryan, last night's emergency response suggests that our definition of controversial background might need revision based on demonstrated technical competence rather than industry reputation management, Harper replied. As their conversation ended with unresolved tension about hiring standards and technical evaluation practices, Harper realized that her company's development crisis had exposed systematic issues that extended beyond individual programmer performance to institutional practices that could be excluding valuable expertise while maintaining discriminatory hiring standards disguised as cultural requirements. "Mr. Johnson," Harper said during their follow-up meeting, "I want to offer you an opportunity to demonstrate your development capabilities through formal technical evaluation that could lead to permanent employment in our engineering organization." The offer was both generous recognition and potential exposure to exactly the kind of professional scrutiny that had previously resulted in systematic retaliation despite his exceptional technical qualifications and ethical professional behavior. "Ms. Winters, I appreciate the opportunity, but I need you to understand that formal employment in tech could expose both of us to industry criticism and potential business complications from investors or partners who might view my hiring as inappropriate risk-taking," Malik replied. "Some moral choices require acknowledging that challenging systematic exclusion often involves personal risk for both those who have been blacklisted and those who attempt to provide opportunities that industry retaliation has prevented, requiring collaborative courage rather than individual heroism to achieve sustainable change." 3 weeks after accepting Harper's offer to undergo formal technical evaluation, Malik found himself experiencing the psychological whiplash that came from returning to high-pressure software development environments while simultaneously confronting evidence that Ryan Mitchell had been systematically sabotaging TechFlow's engineering projects to hide his own technical incompetence and maintain his executive position through manipulation rather than merit. "Dad, you look stressed but excited," 8-year-old Zoe observed from across their small kitchen table, where she was working on algorithmic thinking puzzles while monitoring her father's emotional state with the analytical precision that characterized children who had learned to recognize when adult career decisions could fundamentally alter family circumstances. "Zoe, I'm preparing for technical interviews that could help me return to programming work, but I'm also discovering that some of the problems at Ms. Harper's company are being caused by people who don't want qualified developers to succeed," Malik replied, though his voice carried tension that indicated he was processing workplace dynamics that extended beyond individual performance evaluation. The formal evaluation process at TechFlow had required Malik to demonstrate proficiency across multiple programming languages and architectural frameworks, while being observed by senior engineers and external technical consultants whose assessment would determine whether his emergency bug fixes represented sustainable technical competence or isolated problem-solving success. "Dad, what happens if the computer people decide you're good enough to be a programmer again?" Zoe asked, her question revealing both pride in her father's technical abilities and concern about changes that could disrupt the financial stability they'd achieved through his custodial employment. "If I pass the evaluations, I might be able to work as a developer, while also maintaining some custodial responsibilities until we're certain the programming job is permanent and secure," Malik explained, using careful planning language to acknowledge opportunities while protecting against disappointment if technical employment proved temporary or unstable. The conversation was taking place at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning, before Malik's comprehensive technical assessment that would include system design, code review, and collaborative programming exercises designed to evaluate both individual competence and team integration capabilities. "Mr. Johnson," Harper had said during their preparation meeting the previous day, "I want you to understand that this evaluation process is being conducted under unusual scrutiny because some senior staff have questioned whether emergency problem-solving translates to sustainable long-term development contributions. Ms. Winters, what specific concerns have been raised about my technical qualifications?" Malik had asked, recognizing that challenges to his competence might reflect the same discriminatory attitudes that had prevented his employment in tech for 3 years. "Ryan has suggested that developers who've been out of industry practice may lack current knowledge of modern frameworks and collaborative development practices that are essential for startup success," Harper had replied, her tone indicating that she was reporting others' concerns rather than sharing her own doubts about his capabilities. The criticism was both professionally insulting and strategically concerning, suggesting that Malik's evaluation would involve defending his technical currency against industry biases that portrayed employment gaps as competence deficits rather than consequences of systematic retaliation. "What specific technical areas will be evaluated?" Malik had pressed, understanding that identifying evaluation criteria would be essential for addressing discriminatory assumptions about his professional readiness. "Current framework knowledge, collaborative coding practices, agile development methodology, and cultural alignment with startup engineering environments." Nadi, the criteria included both legitimate technical requirements and subjective cultural assessments that could be influenced by personal bias rather than objective competence measurement. Now, as Malik prepared for evaluation that could either vindicate his technical qualifications or confirm industry assumptions about blacklisted developers, he was discovering that Zoe had been conducting her own research about discrimination in technology hiring and the challenges facing ethical professionals in corporate environments. "Dad, I read online that lots of companies say they want honest programmers, but then they fire people who tell the truth about problems," Zoe said, displaying printouts from technology ethics websites and whistleblower protection databases. "Zoe, where did you find information about technology ethics and whistleblowing?" Malik asked, surprised by his daughter's independent research into issues he'd been trying to protect her from understanding in detail. "I used the computer at school to research why good programmers like you have trouble getting programming jobs, and I found lots of stories about companies that punish people for doing the right thing. The research was both impressive and concerning, revealing that Zoe understood more about systematic retaliation than he'd realized while demonstrating analytical skills that exceeded typical 8-year-old capabilities. "What did you learn from your research?" Malik asked, recognizing that his daughter's investigation might have identified patterns he hadn't fully acknowledged. "I learned that companies sometimes say programmers are not team players or difficult to work with, but what they really mean is that they don't want people who might tell customers or the government about bad things the company is doing." The analysis was both sophisticated and heartbreaking, showing that Zoe had processed systematic corruption with clarity that many adults struggled to acknowledge directly. 3 days later, Malik's technical evaluation reached crisis point when Ryan Mitchell attempted to create artificial challenges and impossible requirements designed to demonstrate that blacklisted developers couldn't adapt to current industry standards and team collaboration expectations. "Johnson, your code architecture choices seem overly complex for startup environments that prioritize rapid development over elegant solutions," Ryan reported to Harper during Malik's practical examination, his critique focusing on quality rather than functionality or performance metrics. "Mr. Johnson's architecture demonstrates exceptional performance optimization and maintainability standards that exceed most startup codebases I've reviewed," replied Sofia Rodriguez, the head of engineering conducting the formal evaluation. "Sofia, startup success requires different priorities than enterprise development," Ryan insisted, his tone carrying authority about industry standards that non-technical executives might not fully understand. The conflict was both professional disagreement and systematic attempt to disqualify Malik through subjective criteria that could override objective technical performance measurements and code quality assessments. "Ryan, I need specific technical deficiencies or performance issues to justify negative evaluation," Sofia replied, her engineering authority challenging company politics that prioritized personal preference over measurable competence. As the evaluation continued, with Ryan creating increasingly artificial obstacles, while Sofia documented Malik's exceptional performance across all technical requirements, both Harper and Zoe watched from the observation area with growing understanding that systematic discrimination required active resistance rather than passive acceptance of biased evaluation processes. "Ms. Harper," Zoe said during a break in the evaluation, "Mr. Ryan is being mean to my dad because he doesn't want him to get the programming job, not because my dad isn't good enough to write computer code." The 8-year-old's observation was both accurate and strategic, providing Harper with clear perspective on personnel dynamics that she might have misinterpreted as legitimate professional evaluation rather than discriminatory gatekeeping. "Zoe, what makes you think Mr. Ryan is being unfair to your father?" Harper asked, recognizing that child witnesses often noticed discrimination that adults learn to rationalize or ignore. "Because he keeps making up problems that aren't really problems, and he never talks to the other programmers the way he talks to my dad, and he keeps trying to trick Dad instead of just watching him code good programs." The analysis was both perceptive and damning, revealing patterns of differential treatment that characterized discriminatory evaluation designed to exclude rather than assess fairly. As Malik's evaluation concluded with Sofia documenting exceptional technical performance across all objective requirements, while Ryan filed complaints alleging cultural misalignment and collaboration concerns, all participants understood that formal qualification was only the first step in challenging systematic discrimination that could find new criteria for exclusion when confronted with evidence of competence. "Mr. Johnson," Sofia said, as she completed her technical evaluation, "your programming performance exceeded our startup requirements in all measurable areas, and I'm recommending immediate hiring based on demonstrated technical excellence and problem-solving capabilities. The validation was both personally meaningful and professionally crucial, providing official documentation that could counteract discriminatory hiring practices with objective performance evidence that was difficult to dismiss through subjective cultural criticism. "Dad, you passed," Zoe said, hugging her father with 8-year-old enthusiasm that temporarily overcame her analytical concern about adult workplace politics and systematic barriers to qualified professionals. But as Ryan prepared to escalate his resistance through investor relations and board member connections that could override technical recommendations with business and cultural concerns, both Harper and Malik understood that systematic discrimination rarely accepted defeat through individual qualification and often intensified resistance when confronted with evidence of its own bias and professional inadequacy. Some sacrificial choices require recognizing that challenging institutional discrimination often escalates rather than eliminates resistance, and that individual technical success may require collaborative institutional change to become sustainable rather than remaining isolated achievement vulnerable to continued systematic undermining. 6 weeks after Malik's technical evaluation had demonstrated exceptional programming competence, while exposing Ryan Mitchell's systematic sabotage of engineering projects, Sofia Rodriguez arrived at TechFlow Solutions to conduct what Harper had described as engineering culture assessment, but which represented the first comprehensive evaluation of technical leadership and development practices that the startup had ever undertaken. "Mr. Johnson," Sophia said as she entered the development lab where Malik was conducting code reviews while navigating ongoing resistance from Ryan and his allies. "I've been documenting the technical improvements you've implemented and the resistance you've encountered, and I wanted to discuss how your experience might inform our engineering management reforms." Sophia had served as head of engineering for 18 months, during which she'd trusted Ryan's technical leadership while gradually discovering that his architectural decisions were creating systematic technical debt and performance issues that threatened the company's ability to scale successfully. "Viz. Rodriguez, I appreciate your support, but I want to be clear that my situation is still precarious, and I'm not comfortable making broad statements about engineering culture while I'm still establishing my position here," Malik replied, his voice carrying the careful restraint he'd learned for managing professional exposure while navigating ongoing workplace conflicts. "Actually, Malik, I'm conducting this assessment because Harper has asked me to evaluate whether our current engineering leadership is creating systematic obstacles to technical excellence and qualified developer retention," Sophia explained, settling into her chair with materials that suggested she'd already reviewed extensive documentation about Ryan's resistance to Malik's contributions. "She's also asked me to determine whether discriminatory practices might be affecting our ability to identify and retain the most qualified technical talent available in the market." The revelation meant that Malik's individual case had attracted senior leadership attention as part of systematic concerns about how engineering management practices could compromise startup competitiveness through exclusion of capable developers. "What kind of systematic obstacles are you documenting?" Harper asked, joining their consultation with strategic interest in information that could affect technical team performance and investor confidence in their development capabilities. "Code review processes that prioritize personal preference over performance metrics, architectural decisions that create unnecessary complexity to justify senior developer positions, and evaluation criteria that emphasize cultural conformity rather than technical contribution," Sophia replied. The comprehensive assessment provided framework for understanding engineering dysfunction as management failure rather than individual developer limitations, suggesting that inclusive technical leadership could improve performance outcomes rather than just satisfy diversity requirements. Over the following 2 hours, Sophia presented findings from her evaluation of how discriminatory practices had affected TechFlow's technical development and competitive positioning in their market segment. Our engineering productivity metrics show significant improvement correlation with Malik's contributions, while simultaneously revealing declining performance indicators associated with Ryan's architectural decisions and team management approaches, Sophia continued. What you're describing sounds like individual performance evaluation rather than systematic culture assessment, Ryan interjected, appearing unexpectedly in the conference room with the defensive posture that characterized executives whose authority was being challenged through objective performance measurement. Ryan, what I'm describing is evidence-based leadership evaluation that demonstrates how management practices affect entire team performance rather than just individual developer contributions, Sophia replied, her technical authority providing framework for challenging personal opinion with measurable outcomes. The conversation was interrupted by Zoe's arrival from the youth technology program that Harper had expanded to include family members of employees, where she'd been developing programming skills while observing workplace dynamics that affected her father's professional integration. "Dad," Zoe said, approaching with the confidence that had developed through weeks of witnessing her father's technical vindication. "Ms. Sophia, I wanted to thank you for helping people understand that good programming requires fair management that doesn't punish people for being better at coding than their bosses." At 8, Zoe had developed sophisticated understanding of workplace power dynamics through observing her father's evaluation process and the resistance he'd encountered from Ryan and other technical staff who felt threatened by his competence. "Zoe, your father's technical contributions have helped us understand important things about how engineering teams can better support high-performance development while maintaining collaborative work environments," Sophia replied, her tone acknowledging that children often witness professional dynamics with clarity that adults learn to rationalize or diplomatically obscure. "Ms. Sophia," Zoe continued, "I've been researching technology companies, and the most successful ones hire the best programmers regardless of what happened at their previous jobs, while the unsuccessful ones worry more about people fitting in than about people writing good code." The observation was both precocious and strategically relevant, demonstrating that performance-based evaluation could provide competitive advantages rather than just meeting ethical diversity standards. Meanwhile, Ryan was experiencing increasing isolation as technical performance data and objective code quality measurements contradicted his claims about engineering leadership and architectural decision-making effectiveness. "Sophia, I want to be clear that startup success requires consistent technical vision and proven leadership rather than experimental hiring practices that could compromise team cohesion and investor confidence," Ryan said, his voice carrying warning about potential business complications. "Ryan, Malik's technical contributions have measurably improved our code quality, performance metrics, and development velocity while demonstrating leadership capabilities that support team growth rather than individual status protection," Sophia replied, her engineering data providing objective framework for challenging subjective management preferences. The exchange revealed fundamental disagreement about whether technical excellence represented operational asset or political liability, with performance measurements increasingly supporting inclusive practices over traditional hierarchical approaches that prioritize personal authority over team effectiveness. As their alliance solidified around developing engineering practices that could improve both technical outcomes and team dynamics, all participants except Ryan understood that Malik's individual success had broader implications for startup competitiveness that extended beyond personnel equity to operational excellence through evidence-based talent management. "Harper," Sophia said, as their planning session continued, "the technical improvements we've documented suggest that our engineering performance could be significantly enhanced through systematic evaluation of management practices that either support or undermine developer contributions." What kind of systematic changes are you recommending?" Harper asked, recognizing that engineering excellence could provide both competitive advantage and investor confidence through measurable performance improvement rather than just cultural diversity initiatives. "Performance-based leadership evaluation, technical mentoring programs that support skill development rather than status protection, and collaborative code review processes that prioritize learning and improvement over personal authority maintenance," Sophia replied. The recommendations were both technically sound and strategically advantageous, suggesting that inclusive engineering practices could improve business outcomes rather than just satisfy ethical development standards or regulatory diversity requirements. "What I've learned through this process," Malik said as their consultation concluded, "is that technical excellence requires collaborative engineering culture rather than hierarchical management that prioritizes individual status over team performance, because the most innovative solutions emerge from environments that support diverse perspectives and continuous learning." Meanwhile, Zoe was participating in the technology education program that had been expanded to include algorithmic thinking and ethical technology development, where she was developing both technical skills and leadership capabilities. "Mr. Johnson," said Amanda Foster, the program coordinator, "Zoe has demonstrated exceptional analytical abilities and collaborative leadership during group programming projects and technology ethics discussions." "What kind of leadership has she shown?" Malik asked, proud of his daughter's development while concerned about age-appropriate expectations and responsibilities in technical environments. "She's been helping other children understand that successful programming teams include people with different backgrounds and experiences, and she's developed presentations about how discrimination can actually make technology companies less competitive by excluding qualified developers." Danuzi, the leadership was both impressive and concerning, revealing that Zoe was processing complex professional and ethical issues with sophistication that exceeded typical child development, while potentially assuming advocacy responsibilities that should remain adult obligations rather than childhood burdens. Some alliances require recognizing that individual technical success becomes sustainable only when institutional change creates systematic support for performance-based evaluation rather than relying on exceptional individuals to repeatedly overcome discriminatory barriers disguised as cultural requirements or management preferences. The question now was whether their collaboration could create engineering culture changes that would benefit future qualified developers, or whether resistance would find new methods for maintaining exclusionary practices despite objective evidence of their negative impact on technical performance and business competitiveness. The confrontation escalated when Ryan Mitchell orchestrated a coordinated campaign involving board members and key investors to question TechFlow's risky hiring practices, while simultaneously sabotaging critical system deployments to create evidence that Malik's technical contributions were destabilizing the company's operational reliability. "Dad, Mr. Ryan told the other programmers that you're going to get everyone fired because investors don't like the company hiring people with bad reputations," Zoe said during their evening homework session, her 8-year-old voice carrying the controlled concern that characterized children who had learned to recognize when adult workplace conflicts threatened family security. Malik immediately understood that Ryan's resistance had escalated beyond professional disagreement to systematic character assassination designed to eliminate him from TechFlow while positioning Ryan as the responsible leader, protecting the company from dangerous hiring decisions. Zoe, Mr. Ryan is spreading those stories because he's worried that having me as a programmer makes him look less important to Ms. Harper and the investors, Malik explained, using age-appropriate language while acknowledging the reality of workplace persecution and professional sabotage. The attacks had intensified beyond internal company politics to coordinated investor relations campaign that included anonymous complaints to venture capital firms alleging that TechFlow's hiring of ethically compromised developers represented fiduciary risk that could jeopardize portfolio company valuations and market positioning. Mr. Johnson, we've received concerns from several board members about your employment history and its potential impact on our Series B funding timeline, reported TechFlow's legal counsel, Patricia Martinez, during an emergency meeting called to address investor relations complications. Are these concerns based on documented performance issues or anonymous allegations about my previous whistleblowing activities? Malik asked, recognizing the pattern of systematic harassment that had characterized his previous attempts to maintain employment in the technology industry. The concerns focus on reputational risk and cultural alignment challenges that could affect investor confidence in our leadership judgment and hiring practices, Martinez replied, her tone indicating that she was reporting others' positions rather than expressing legal opinions about employment discrimination. The strategy was both sophisticated and malicious, exploiting investor relations processes to create business pressure that could justify employment termination regardless of technical performance or objective contribution measurements. Meanwhile, Harper was experiencing her own confrontation with institutional resistance as Ryan's allies launched coordinated efforts to position her as an inexperienced founder whose poor judgment about personnel decisions threatened the company's viability and investor returns. Harper, the Engineering Advisory Board has expressed serious concerns about the technical direction and personnel decisions that could compromise our competitive positioning, reported board member David Kim during an emergency executive session. What specific technical concerns have been raised about our development performance and engineering outcomes? Harper asked, recognizing that technical criticism could be used to conceal discriminatory motivations behind legitimate-sounding business objections. Concerns about code stability, team cohesion, and development practices that prioritize individual contributions over collaborative engineering culture that investors expect from successful startups. The allegations were both professionally damaging and strategically designed to exploit startup vulnerabilities about scalability and team performance while concealing discriminatory objectives behind business and technical terminology. David, our performance metrics show measurable improvement in code quality, deployment reliability, and development velocity since Malik joined our engineering team, Harper replied. Are we addressing documented problems or managing investor perceptions about hiring practices? The distinction was crucial for determining whether they were confronting legitimate business challenges or systematic resistance to inclusive hiring that threatened both individual careers and company performance. As the confrontation intensified, with Ryan's network escalating pressure through investor relations, while Harper defended evidence-based hiring against discriminatory business practices, Zoe took decisive action by documenting the systematic nature of the attacks against her father and presenting her findings to Sophia and Harper. Ms. Harper, I researched all the complaints against programmers who got fired for telling the truth about bad things companies were doing. Zoe said during the family counseling session that had been established to help her process workplace conflicts affecting her father's career stability. "What did you discover, Zoe?" Harper asked, recognizing that children often identified patterns that adults missed or rationalized away through professional diplomatic considerations. "I found that Mr. Ryan and the people helping him use exactly the same words and same reasons to attack every good programmer who might be better than them, like someone gave them a list of things to say to make ethical programmers look dangerous. The analysis was both methodologically sophisticated and strategically powerful, revealing coordination among technology professionals to exclude competitors through standardized discrimination disguised as business risk management and cultural evaluation." "Zoe, can you show me this research?" Sophia asked, understanding that documentation of systematic discrimination could provide Harper with evidence needed to address coordinated professional retaliation rather than isolated personnel conflicts. "I made spreadsheets showing how the same people file complaints against programmers who reported illegal things their companies were doing, and how companies that fire ethical programmers have more technical problems than companies that protect them. The research was both analytically rigorous and strategically crucial, demonstrating systematic discrimination while providing business-based arguments for inclusive hiring practices that protected qualified developers from retaliation." As Zoe's documentation revealed the coordinated nature of resistance to Malik's employment and similar cases throughout the technology industry, Harper began investigating not just individual complaints, but the networks of professionals who were systematically excluding qualified developers through fabricated business and cultural objections. "Patricia," Harper said during their legal consultation, "Zoe's research suggests that the investor concerns about Malik are part of coordinated discrimination rather than isolated business risk assessment." "Harper, if that's accurate, we're dealing with systematic employment discrimination that could create legal liability for any venture capital firms or board members participating in coordinated exclusion of qualified developers," Martinez replied. "What are the implications for Malik's employment status and our company's investor relations? If we can document coordinated discrimination, Malik's employment becomes legally protected, and any investors participating in systematic exclusion could face federal civil rights investigations that would affect their portfolio companies and fund operations." The legal framework was both validating and strategically advantageous, providing regulatory protection for evidence-based hiring while creating accountability for investors who participated in discriminatory business practices disguised as risk management. "Dad, the lawyers say the people trying to hurt your programming job are breaking laws about treating people fairly at work," Zoe reported to Malik following her interview with legal counsel and federal employment investigators. "Zoe, federal authorities are investigating the complaints to determine whether they're based on business concerns or systematic discrimination," Malik replied, using careful language while acknowledging his daughter's sophisticated understanding of the legal situation. "I know they're discrimination because I researched them and found the pattern that shows Mr. Ryan and his friends do this to lots of good programmers who tell the truth about companies doing bad things," Zoe said with 8-year-old clarity about systematic injustice. As federal authorities prepared to investigate discriminatory investor practices, while Ryan faced potential legal consequences for participating in coordinated employment retaliation, Malik realized that his individual case had become part of systematic change that could benefit multiple qualified developers who had been excluded from technology careers through organized discrimination. "Sophia," Malik said during their final consultation before federal hearings, "what Zoe discovered about coordinated discrimination suggests that my experience represents institutional problem rather than individual workplace conflict." "Malik, Your case has helped federal authorities recognize systematic barriers that affect technology innovation by excluding qualified developers. And Zoe's research has provided documentation that supports regulatory intervention, Sophia replied. Will this actually change industry practices, or will the discrimination just find new methods for excluding ethical developers? That depends partly on whether technology companies choose to support evidence-based hiring or continue resistance that could trigger federal enforcement actions affecting their investor relations and business operations. Some confrontations with institutional discrimination require recognizing that individual cases can catalyze systematic change when supported by rigorous documentation and federal regulatory intervention, but that lasting transformation requires industry commitment to inclusive practices rather than just compliance with legal requirements to avoid prosecution. 18 months after federal authorities sanctioned Ryan Mitchell and 11 other technology executives for coordinated employment discrimination, Chief Technology Officer Malik Johnson stood in TechFlow Solutions' new Ethics and Innovation Center, teaching a cohort of startup founders about inclusive hiring practices that had become venture capital requirements following the Mitchell investigation and subsequent regulatory reforms. The evaluation methods we're implementing today, Malik explained to an audience of entrepreneurs and technical directors, are designed to help you identify qualified developers regardless of their employment history, while ensuring that innovation standards remain the highest priority in technology hiring. At 10 years old, Zoe sat in the training room's family area working on advanced machine learning algorithms while simultaneously developing a presentation about bias in technical evaluation, her presence representing both the stability they had rebuilt and her ongoing commitment to advocacy that had helped catalyze industry-wide changes in hiring practices. Mr. Johnson, asked Lisa Chen from Quantum Dynamics, how do you balance comprehensive diversity initiatives with the technical precision that innovation requires? The question reflected ongoing tension between inclusive hiring and performance concerns that had characterized industry adoption of federal anti-discrimination requirements in technology employment. Ms. Chen, what we've learned is that diverse hiring actually improves technical innovation by ensuring that development teams include different problem-solving approaches and perspectives that can prevent costly mistakes and identify breakthrough solutions, Malik replied. His response based on 18 months of consulting with startups, implementing evidence-based hiring protocols. Federal data now confirms that diverse technical teams demonstrate superior performance in complex development challenges requiring creative engineering and collaborative innovation. Harper, now wearing the confident demeanor of someone whose commitment to inclusive practices had transformed into industry leadership in technology ethics and innovation, observed this exchange with satisfaction that combined business success with personal pride in supporting Malik's professional rehabilitation and Zoe's intellectual development. Since the federal investigation, TechFlow Solutions had become the premier consulting firm for technology industry diversity and innovation training, generating over $300 million in annual revenue while helping hundreds of startups avoid discrimination lawsuits and improve technical performance through inclusive hiring practices. Malik, Harper said during the networking break following his presentation, the Department of Commerce has requested that we develop technical training curricula for federal innovation initiatives. Are you interested in that level of government partnership? The opportunity represented both professional recognition and potential platform for systematic change that could affect technology development nationwide rather than just individual startup practices. Harper, I'm honored by the recognition, but I need to consider how federal consulting visibility might affect Zoe's educational development and our family's ability to maintain the balance we've established between professional advocacy and personal stability, Malik replied. "What kind of considerations are you thinking about? High-profile federal work could create expectations for Zoe to become a public advocate for technology diversity, and I want to ensure that her intellectual development focuses on her own interests rather than carrying adult responsibilities for industry reform." The concerns reflected wisdom about balancing family well-being with professional opportunities that had developed through experiencing both the benefits and costs of challenging institutional discrimination through individual courage and systematic advocacy. Meanwhile, federal authorities were conducting their annual assessment of technology industry compliance with anti-discrimination regulations, documenting progress that had exceeded initial projections for both hiring practices and innovation outcomes. "Malik," said Administrator Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Commerce, "the industry changes that resulted from your case and Zoe's research have contributed to a 42% improvement in technical innovation metrics and a 78% increase in qualified developer retention across technology companies." While the impact was both personally meaningful and professionally significant, demonstrating that individual courage combined with systematic advocacy could create institutional changes that protected both equal opportunity and technical excellence. Administrator Walsh, what I've learned is that technical innovation requires not just programming competence, but diverse perspectives that can identify problems and solutions that homogeneous teams might miss, Malik said. "Your case helped us understand that discrimination doesn't just harm individual developers. It creates innovation risks by limiting the range of experience and problem-solving capabilities available during complex technical challenges," Administrator Walsh replied. As their conversation continued, Zoe was participating in TechFlow's Youth Technology program, where she was developing artificial intelligence skills while working on peer education projects about systematic bias and evidence-based evaluation in technical environments. "Dad," Zoe said as they prepared to leave the office after her completion of the machine learning workshop, "I think I want to study computer science and policy analysis in college so I can help design systems that prevent discrimination while improving technical innovation." The aspiration represented both intellectual interest and emotional processing of their family's experience with institutional change through collaborative advocacy and systematic reform. "Zoe, you have the analytical skills and ethical foundation to succeed in computer science if that's what you decide to pursue," Malik replied, using the supportive communication style he developed for encouraging her interests while ensuring that career expectations remained age-appropriate. "And if I become a computer scientist, I'll already understand that making better technology requires having lots of different kinds of smart people working together, and that preventing discrimination actually helps everyone build more innovative solutions." The insight reflected mature understanding of systems thinking and social justice that had developed through witnessing institutional change emerge from individual courage, supported by evidence-based advocacy and collaborative reform efforts. 6 months later, Malik stood in the kitchen of the 4-bedroom house in suburban Denver that his salary and consulting fees had made affordable, preparing dinner while reviewing materials for the Stanford University Executive Education Program in Technology Ethics and Innovation that he would teach the following semester. "Dad," Zoe called from the living room where she was working on a science fair project about bias in artificial intelligence systems, "can you help me understand why some people think that hiring the best programmers and having diverse programmers are different goals instead of the same goal?" The question was both academic assignment and personal inquiry about systematic thinking that had shaped their family's experience with institutional change. Zoe, people sometimes think diversity and technical excellence are competing priorities because they don't understand that excellence requires including all qualified people rather than just people from similar backgrounds with similar approaches to problem solving, Malik explained, joining her at the dining room table where her project materials included case studies of various technology innovation and discrimination outcomes. So when companies say they want the best programmers, but they only hire programmers who look the same and think the same way, they're actually not getting the best programmers or the most innovative solutions. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Real technical excellence requires systematic evaluation that recognizes talent wherever it exists, rather than limiting opportunities to people who fit traditional expectations about what qualified developers should look like or where they should come from. Iman, as they worked together on homework that combined academic learning with personal experience, both Malik and Zoe understood that their family's transformation represented more than individual success. It demonstrated that systematic change was possible when individual advocacy was supported by evidence-based research and regulatory commitment to institutional reform. Malik, Harper said during their quarterly business review, I want to discuss international expansion of our technology ethics and innovation consulting to help companies worldwide develop inclusive practices that improve both equity and technical outcomes. Are you interested in global impact work? The growth opportunity was both remarkable business development and recognition that their work had created expertise that could improve technology innovation and diversity globally rather than just domestically. Harper, I'm interested in international impact, but I want to ensure that our expansion maintains focus on evidence-based change rather than just compliance training, and that any global work includes educational opportunities for Zoe that support her intellectual development. Some families, they had discovered, were strengthened rather than limited by confronting institutional discrimination when their courage was supported by systematic research, regulatory intervention, and collaborative commitment to evidence-based change that benefited entire industries rather than just individual careers. This story reminds us that systematic discrimination often disguises itself as professional standards, but that evidence-based evaluation reveals talent in unexpected places while improving outcomes for everyone. In a world where bias can compromise both individual opportunity and institutional innovation, Malik and Zoe's partnership shows us that challenging discrimination requires both individual courage and systematic advocacy supported by rigorous research and regulatory commitment to evidence-based practices. Sometimes the most profound victories happen when individual expertise catalyzes institutional changes that create opportunities for countless others while improving innovation and effectiveness for entire industries. What qualified professionals might your organization be overlooking due to unconscious bias or systematic barriers? How could evidence-based evaluation help you identify talent that improves both diversity and technical excellence?